Today's video is going to sound completely made up. You will probably think to yourself there is absolutely no way this is true. But it absolutely is, and that is what makes this story so impactful. Just when you think nothing else can go wrong, it does. But enough blabbering, let's get into it. Frane Selak was an ordinary man living in Croatia, a music teacher with a quiet, unassuming life. Born in 1929, he had seen his share of challenges, but nothing could have prepared him for the extraordinary events that would define his life. In this story, you will be blown away by the sheer misfortune that could hit one man, accompanied by almost unbelievable luck that held his hand throughout his entire life. It was a cold day in January 1962 when the first incident occurred, an event that would mark the beginning of a series of near-death experiences that seemed too improbable to be true. Yet there is no denying that they were. Selak was on a train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik, a journey he had taken many times before. The train moved steadily through the rugged terrain, cutting through the Croatian landscape like a silver snake winding its way home. The passengers were a mix of locals and tourists, chatting softly or staring out at the snow-covered fields. Selak, engrossed in his thoughts, barely noticed the serene landscape outside the window he was sitting at, and most certainly completely failed to notice the gradual slowing of the train as it approached a narrow bridge over the Neretva River. Then, without warning, disaster struck. It later was found that the icy conditions and the sheer weight of the train were too much for it to slow down sufficiently to navigate the curve that took it over the narrow bridge. Before any of the passengers could even realize that there was a problem, the train derailed, careening off the tracks and plunging into the icy river below. The train carriage Selak was in got pushed up high into the air by the carriages behind it, and his body got tossed around like a rag doll. Then, as the train plunged into the freezing water of the river below, complete chaos erupted. The frigid freezing water flooded the compartments, and deafening screams of panic and pain filled the air. The panic spread like wildfire, and passengers scrambled and trampled each other to escape the sinking train. Selak, disoriented and gasping for breath, was flung clear of the carriage on the way down to the water. However, he found himself in a desperate struggle against the powerful current of the river pulling him under. The cold was unbearable, numbing his limbs as he struggled to stay afloat. Miraculously, Selak managed to grab hold of a floating piece of debris. Clinging to it for dear life, he was carried downstream until he finally reached the riverbank. Exhausted and shivering, he was pulled from the water by rescuers who had seen the whole event transpire and arrived on the scene. Of the 17 passengers who lost their lives that day, Selak was not one of them. He had survived, but the memory of that icy plunge would haunt him for years to come. In the days that followed, Selak couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened. He had come so close to death, yet he had walked away with nothing more than a few bruises, and well, a deep sense of unease. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a series of bizarre events that would shape his life in ways he could never have imagined. The media caught wind of the story, and soon Selak was known as the man who had cheated death. Friends and family marveled at his survival, calling him lucky, though Selak himself wasn't so sure. How could one be considered lucky when they had faced such terror? He tried to move on, returning to his life as a music teacher, but something had shifted inside him. The train accident had left him with a lingering sense of dread, a feeling that his life was somehow out of his control. But life went on, and so did Selak. He had no way of knowing that fate had much more in store for him, events that would test the limits of his resilience and redefine what it meant to be lucky. The train accident was only the beginning, a prelude to a life filled with the most extraordinary twists of fate. Frane Selak tried to put the train accident behind him, but the event had left a scar on his psyche. Life, however, seemed determined to keep him on edge. It was as if some unseen force was playing a twisted game with him, throwing him into one impossible situation after another. The next calamity came 4 years later in 1966, when Selak boarded a bus traveling through the Croatian countryside. The day was bright and clear, the kind of day that made the world seem calm and predictable. The bus was filled with passengers, each lost in their own thoughts. Selak, who had always enjoyed the tranquility of a long bus ride, found himself gazing out the window at the rolling hills and lush greenery. But as the bus rounded a sharp curve, something went terribly wrong. The driver lost control, and the bus veered off the road, plummeting into the river below. Selak was jolted from his seat as the bus tumbled down the embankment, crashing into the water with a deafening roar. Once again, he found himself submerged in icy water, struggling to free himself from the wreckage. The memories of the train accident came flooding back as he fought to survive, the cold water numbing his body and the fear threatening to overwhelm him. But Selak refused to give in. He clawed his way to the surface, gasping for air as he emerged from the sinking bus. The current was strong, pulling at him with relentless force, but he managed to grab hold of a nearby rock. With every ounce of strength he had left, he hauled himself onto the shore, collapsing onto the cold, wet ground. The bus, along with several passengers, disappeared beneath the water. Selak had survived once again, though the toll it took on him was immense. This second brush with death left Selak deeply shaken. He began to wonder if he was cursed, or if some cosmic joke was being played at his expense. How could it be that he had now escaped death twice in such a similar manner? Friends and family were astonished, dubbing him the unbreakable man, but Selak found little comfort in their words. He couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at work. And if you were thinking that this was only the beginning of his lucky streak during times of bad luck, you would be 100% correct. Over the next few years, Selak tried to live a normal life, but the sense of dread followed him wherever he went. Then, in 1970, the unimaginable happened once more. This time, Selak was flying from Zagreb to Rijeka. Flying made him uneasy, but it was a necessity, and he had convinced himself that lightning couldn't strike 3 times. The plane was a small one, with just a handful of passengers on board. The flight was uneventful until, suddenly, one of the doors blew open mid-flight. The cabin depressurized, and chaos erupted as passengers were sucked toward the gaping hole. Selak, seated near the door, was flung from the plane, his body hurtling through the air at terrifying speed. This time he thought to himself that this would be the final straw. This had to be the end of him, but fate intervened in the most unlikely way. As Selak fell, he saw the ground rushing up to meet him. In those final moments, he thought of his family, his life, and the absurdity of his situation. Then, as if by some miracle, he crashed into a haystack below, a soft, forgiving cushion that absorbed the impact and saved his life. Sounds like fiction, right? Well, it's not. The plane itself crashed into a mountainside, killing everyone on board. Selak was the sole survivor. The world was stunned by the news. How could one man survive so many catastrophes? The media dubbed him the luckiest unlucky man alive, a title that would follow him for the rest of his days. Selak, however, felt anything but lucky. Each near-death experience left him more rattled, more convinced that his life was being guided by forces beyond his control. As the years passed, Selak experienced 2 more close calls, both involving his cars. In 1973, his car burst into flames while he was driving, forcing him to leap from the vehicle just before it exploded. And then, in 1995, another car fire left him shaken but unharmed. By this point, Selak had become almost numb to the danger, accepting that his life was a constant dance with death. But wait, that was not the end of it. In 1996, Selak faced yet another brush with mortality. While walking in his hometown, he was struck by a bus. The impact should have been fatal, but Selak walked away with only minor injuries. And then, a few months later, he was driving along a mountain road when he swerved to avoid an oncoming truck. His car went off the road, plunging into a ravine. But in a bizarre twist of fate, Selak was thrown from the car and landed in a tree, watching as his vehicle plummeted to the ground far below. By this point, Selak's life had become the stuff of legend. He had survived a train wreck, a plane crash, bus accidents, car explosions, and falls from great heights. Each time, he walked away with his life, though the psychological toll was immense. Selak became a man haunted by his own existence, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to strike. Despite everything, Selak remained a humble man, never seeking fame or recognition for his incredible survival story. He continued to teach music, finding solace in the rhythm and melody of his compositions. But even as he tried to lead a normal life, the shadow of his past loomed large, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the capriciousness of fate. His life had essentially become a roller coaster of emotions, a constant battle between relief at having survived and the gnawing fear that his luck would eventually run out. Each new catastrophe only deepened his sense of unease, leaving him to grapple with the psychological scars that few could understand. To the outside world, Selak was a man who had cheated death more times than seemed possible, a walking miracle. But behind the public fascination lay a man burdened by the weight of his own survival. Selak became increasingly withdrawn. The once lively and sociable music teacher began to retreat into himself, his days punctuated by moments of introspection and fear. He would often find himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of his life over and over in his mind. Each brush with death was like a stone dropped into a pond, sending ripples of anxiety through his consciousness. He couldn't help but wonder why he had been spared so many times when others had not. Was there some purpose to his survival? Or was it all just a cruel joke played by the universe? These questions plagued him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any answers. The randomness of it all was what terrified him the most. There was no logic, no pattern to the disasters that had befallen him. They simply happened, leaving him to pick up the pieces each time. Selak's relationships also suffered as a result of all these crazy experiences. His wife, who had been his rock through the early years of their marriage, found it increasingly difficult to connect with him. The man she had fallen in love with had changed, his easygoing nature replaced by a brooding intensity that frightened her. She could see the toll that his experiences had taken on him, but she didn't know how to help. Their conversations became strained, their interactions tinged with an unspoken tension. According to reports, friends too noticed the change in Selak. The once jovial man who could light up a room with his laughter now seemed distant and preoccupied. Social gatherings, which he had once enjoyed, became unbearable. The constant questions and comments about his luck only served to remind him of the horrors he had endured. He grew tired of the incredulous stares, the whispered conversations that followed him wherever he went. People treated him like a curiosity, a living legend whose life was defined by the improbable events that had shaped it. As the years passed, Selak withdrew further into the sanctuary of his home. His music became his refuge, the one thing that remained constant in a life full of chaos. He spent hours at the piano, pouring his emotions into the keys, finding solace in the melodies that flowed from his fingers. Music was his way of making sense of the world, a language that allowed him to express what words could not. But even this escape was tinged with sadness. The notes he played were often melancholy, reflecting the inner turmoil that he struggled to suppress. But despite his efforts to find peace, the fear never left him. It lurked in the back of his mind, a shadow that followed him everywhere he went. He became hyper-vigilant, constantly scanning his surroundings for signs of danger. Every loud noise, every sudden movement, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body. He developed a deep-seated mistrust of the world, convinced that disaster could strike at any moment. Selak simply couldn't escape the feeling that he was living on borrowed time. And who could blame the man, right? Then in 2003, at the age of 64, an unexpected event shook Selak's life once again, this time in a way that seemed to defy all the odds. After years of living with the belief that he was cursed, Selak bought a lottery ticket. It was an impulsive decision, one made on a whim during a routine trip to the store. He had never been one to gamble, having always believed that luck was a fickle thing not to be tempted. But something that day compelled him to take a chance, to test the limits of his improbable luck. When the winning numbers were announced, Selak could hardly believe his ears. He had won the jackpot, a staggering sum that would change his life forever. The irony was not lost on him. After surviving a lifetime of disasters, he had finally been dealt a hand that seemed to make up for all the pain and fear he had endured. Again, the media went into a frenzy, dubbing him the luckiest man in the world. But for Selak, the win was bittersweet. However, the money brought with it a new set of challenges. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of his fortune. Friends and distant relatives came out of the woodwork, each with their own stories of hardship and need. The pressure to share his winnings became overwhelming, and Selak found himself in a moral quandary. He had lived a life defined by survival, not wealth. The sudden influx of money felt like an alien concept, something that didn't quite belong to him. Despite the challenges, Selak tried to use the money to bring some stability to his life. He bought a new house, one that was far from the sites of his previous disasters. He hoped that a change of scenery might bring him some peace. He donated a portion of his winnings to charity, hoping to do some good with his newfound wealth. But no matter what he did, the sense of unease never fully left him. The lottery win did, however, allow Selak to reconnect with his passion for music. He invested in a state-of-the-art music studio where he could compose and record his own pieces. This creative outlet became his lifeline, a way to channel his emotions into something positive. He found solace in the process of creation, losing himself in the intricate melodies and harmonies that he crafted. In those moments, he could forget about the past, if only for a little while. He continued to grapple with the existential questions that had haunted him since the train accident so many years ago. Why had he been spared? What was the purpose of his survival? These questions gnawed at him, refusing to be silenced. The lottery win did, however, bring about an internal change in Selak. It opened up his perception of life that allowed him to reflect more deeply on his life. He was now able to look back on the string of disasters that had defined his existence with a new focus of trying to find some meaning in the chaos. He thought about the people who had not been as lucky as he was, the lives that had been lost in each of the accidents he had survived. And Selak's musings led him to a surprising conclusion. Perhaps there was no grand purpose to his survival, no cosmic plan that had saved him from death time and time again. Maybe it was all just chance, a series of random events that had played out in the most bizarre and improbable way. This realization finally brought him a strange sense of peace. If there was no reason for his survival, then there was no reason to fear what might come next. Life was unpredictable, and that was simply the way of things. With this newfound perspective, Selak began to let go of the fear that had gripped him for so long. He started to live more in the moment, appreciating the simple pleasures of life that he had once taken for granted. He spent more time with his family, reconnecting with his children and grandchildren. He found joy in the small things, a sunny day, a good meal, a piece of music that moved him. Selak also began to share his story more openly, not as a tale of luck or survival, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He wanted people to understand that while his life had been extraordinary, it was also a reminder of how precious life is. He spoke about the importance of living fully, of embracing the present moment, and of not letting fear dictate one's actions. As he told his story, Selak found that he was finally able to make peace with his past. He no longer saw himself as a victim of fate, but as someone who had simply lived a life full of extremes. His survival was not a curse, nor was it a blessing. It was just the way things had unfolded. And in accepting that, he found a sense of closure that had eluded him for just about his entire life. By the time he reached his late 70s, Selak had come to terms with his life in a way that he never thought possible. He no longer feared what the future might hold, choosing instead to focus on the present. His music continued to be his refuge, a source of comfort and joy in his later years. And though the memories of his near-death experiences never fully faded, they no longer held the same power over him. But for him, it was enough to know that he had lived a full life, a life that had been unpredictable, terrifying, and in its own way beautiful. He had faced death more times than most people could imagine, and he had come out the other side not just alive, but stronger. As he looked back on his life, Selak realized that he had been given a rare gift, the chance to truly appreciate the value of each day. His brushes with death had taught him to never take anything for granted, to find joy in the little things, and to cherish the time he had with the people he loved. In the end, that was what mattered most to him, not the accidents, not the lottery win, but the simple, everyday moments that made up a life. What are your thoughts on the details of this man's life? Do you believe in luck or in fate? Let us know in the comments, or just share your thoughts. It's always super insightful to see different perspectives from different walks of life. And that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed this bizarre story, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we are going to change the lives of so many desperate, abandoned dogs and pups. Super exciting. Much love. Till next time.